I have chosen the case study of Wells Fargo's scandal. Wells Fargo is an American bank, and during 2011 and 2016, it got into a huge scandal, and that's what I'm going to discuss right now. Every leader has obviously faced this question about what kind of decision to take, whether to focus on profits or to go in the direction that's right, and sometimes they're in opposite directions. And this case study kind of illustrates the most powerful issues leader faces, and it illustrates what happens when profit wins and ethics loses. So between 2011 and 2016, as I mentioned before, about 3.5 million accounts, unauthorized accounts, were created or opened without customer knowledge or consent. Sometimes, signatures were forged to hit aggressive internal sales targets. So this is what happened, and the key stakeholders in this were the customers, whose identities and credit scores were harmed, the frontline employees who were pressured and forced to do this and eventually scapegoated, senior leadership who set the culture and the targets and kind of fostered this kind of outcome, and finally, the regulators and public who, once getting to know this, ultimately demanded accountability. The primary ethical conflict was that whether to look for the short-term performance or do the basic ethical duty to customers and employees. Leadership prioritized growth metrics over integrity and built a system where misconduct felt like the only survivable choice for the employees. In 2018, a case study was published by Ethical Systems, which is a research organization out of Stern School of Business. So the authors argue that the misconduct at Wells Fargo was not an isolated event, but it was a systemic pattern rooted in leadership culture. And this is a direct quote where, which rewarded growth in ways that misconduct was easier to rationalize. Um, and coming to what could have been different, leadership had options at every stage to turn this around and change it. You know, Sales targets could have been revised to meet realistic ethical levels. They could have acted early on uh, with whistleblower warnings, and they should have chosen transparency before it became a public scandal. But they chose silence and pressure. Personally, I feel like there are three aspects for this case study. One is that for me, transparency is non-negotiable. Leader set the tone. Whatever the leader does, it kind of trickles down to the bottom line. Um, Justice also means that you protect the vulnerable first. So the frontline employees were eventually made the scapegoat. They don't have much voice in the company, and they were being set up to take the fall for them. And third, short-term pressure is never the justification in the long term. Like even if you meet short-term goals, the company has got backlash, which remains for a long time. What could have been done differently? I feel like first the incentive should have been restructured. The sales targets were the root cause. Um, Secondly, like listening to whistleblowers early, even when multiple employees raised concerns, they should have had the systems to act upon those warnings. And finally, accountability at the top. When the scandal broke, I think uh, the deflection of the blame was towards the employees, and ethical leadership needs to be the senior leaders who come first and take accountability. And this approach aligns with what I believe in, which is also called the stakeholder leadership. You serve a purpose towards customers, employees, and communities, and not just focus on the shareholders and then the earnings that you put out every quarter. Eventually, Wells Fargo paid about $3 billion in settlements, and they lost a lot of public trust. And a decade after the scandal broke, it still doesn't qualify for federal regulators, like satisfy federal regulators. So ethical shortcuts are like most expensive that you will ever take. So I would, um, you know, conclude with saying that doing the right thing is the most hardest thing for a leadership, and that's what defines a real leader. And doing the right thing even when no one is seeing or watching you. So with that, I conclude my presentation for this week. Thank you.